You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began on 24th February, countries around the world have condemned it for its aggression through sanctions and statements. However, India, one of the key players in international relations and geopolitics, has held its nose and has been mum on the issue. As of 8th March, it has abstained 5 times on any vote of condemnation and has also avoided criticizing Russia publicly. While none of these abstentions have affected the outcome of the vote, India's silence on the entire conflict through its vote has raised questions on how long it can walk on this tightrope. And its abstentions are not surprising since India-Russia relations have endured everything since the Cold War and has remained a close strategic ally of Russia. Pertinently, India imports the majority of its arms and ammunition from Russia, with some estimates going as high as 70%. But India's balancing act is now proving increasingly difficult as the situation worsens in Ukraine by the day, which even prevented Indian students stranded in eastern Ukraine from evacuating. More so, the diplomatic pressure on India is also increasing, with the US indicating multiple times the quote-unquote importance of a strong collective response to Russian aggression, and even the Ukrainian ambassador to India stating that his country is quote-unquote deeply dissatisfied with India's position on the entire issue. So the big question here is, for how long can India look back at an old friendship to make foreign policy decisions in the present and the future? Is it in India's best interest to remain neutral in this crisis? Joining me today to discuss the same is Nandan Unnikrishnan, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, a global policy think tank. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. It's been almost 3 weeks since Russian troops entered Ukraine, and since day one, the move has been met with strong international condemnation, severe sanctions, and inspiring bravery of Ukraine's citizens and soldiers. But missing from those international condemnations so far is the voice of India, who, as I stated earlier, has abstained on 5 votes so far. And these were very essential votes. The first being at the UNSC, where India was the only democracy to abstain. Second was at the United Nations General Assembly. And the third crucial vote was at the UNHRC, which sought a probe into rights and violations in Ukraine amid the conflict. And predictably, Russia has welcomed India's calibrated and quote-unquote balanced stance on the conflict. The issue with this, however, is that Russia may interpret this neutrality as active support. But if you're wondering the reasons behind India's current stance, it is because of the 3 big elephants in the room. First, its historical and military ties with Russia. Second, its friendship with the US. And lastly, a growing and aggressive China on its border. I will divide this episode accordingly. So let me take you through each one of these issues, starting with India's ties with Russia. Russia is India's biggest arms supplier. Though the degree of reliance on Russian arms has reduced over the years, 70% of India's armed forces systems are still of Russian origin. For example, the Indian Air Force operates the Sukhoi Su-30 MKI, the MiG-29 and the MiG-21 fighter jets of Russian origin. The Indian Army's main tanks, the T-72 and T-90, are also of Russian origin. India has also leased nuclear submarines from Russia, and the latter is also helping India build its own as well. And the biggest headline-making purchase so far has been the S-400 air defense system, which India has been eyeing for a long time and received its first shipment just last year in December 2021. Essentially, for India, Russia has always been its go-to port of call when the question of defense spending arises. The diplomatic relations between the two sides have also grown, with 28 agreements signed in the recent 2+2 meeting, which included a 10-year agreement of military technology cooperation. We did an entire episode on the outcome of the summit, and if you have missed that episode, you can find a link to it in our show notes. So, clearly, India has been a good friend to Russia for the past few decades. But the same may not be said about Russia. Russia, time and again, especially since President Putin took power, has delayed deliveries of fighter jets, which has also led to an increase in prices. Russia also remained mum during China's incursions into India in 2020. And recently, Russia also kept India out of the Afghan peace negotiations when the Taliban took over the country in August 2021. And this contrasting friendship begs the question, is India's alliance with Russia in its best interest in the long term, especially given the current geopolitical crisis in Ukraine? According to Nandan Unnikrishnan, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, both India and Russia have benefited from the decades-long friendship, which has resulted in enough trust to last through even this conflict.
Talking about the Indo-Russian friendship, it starts way back in 1950s So we're not talking of 50 years and all.
Yeah.
And let's remember that we were able to carve out Bangladesh out of East Pakistan only because we had the Indo-Soviet Treaty. I mean, don't forget that the US aircraft carriers steamed into the Bay of Bengal, as well as aircraft carriers of Britain. One aircraft carrier, poor fellows, they had only one, steamed into the Arabian Sea. And if it was not for the Soviets, we would have been faced with multiple foes, because then even China might have decided to join the game. And this, if you recall, is after the United States and China, after Kissinger's famous secret visit to Beijing, after which the relationship between China and United States develops very rapidly. So I think if you throw into the mix this number of vetoes that the Soviet Union cast for us, starting with Kashmir, then on our liberating Goa. There also we were called an aggressor, by the way, in the UN. And the Russians vetoed. So a lot of things we've lived behind a shield. So first, I think then if we are going to talk about, costs and trying to put dollars and stuff to this, then we should first evaluate what is that cost, right? The third thing is that you must remember again that the 1990s famous liberal reforms, of course, they come in India after the country was virtually bankrupt, but they came to a country which had a solid industrial base. It already had a nuclear program. It had the entire cycle capable of producing high-tech equipment required for the nuclear industry. It had a space program. It did its own independent launches. May not have been great, but it was doing it. And therefore, we were one of those countries, very few countries in the world, that essentially produced our needs. Yes, of course, we imported. We didn't produce everything from pins to aircraft. We don't even still produce, let's say, engines and stuff like that. But while we talk about today, we should remember that much of that industrial base, if the United States contributed to creation of the agricultural base through the Green Revolution, much of the industrial base was created by the Soviet Union. Whether it is the mining industry, whether it is the metallurgical industry, whether it's oil and gas, multiple spheres, you see, that the Russians contributed to India's industrialization. When we come to today, of course, everyone remembers delays. Yes, there were delays, and the delays were essentially in the delivery of the aircraft carrier. And there are regular delays in the delivery of spare parts for a variety of items, right? Army as well as Air Force. So what happens is that, yes, there are delays, there are cost escalations. However, if you look at our relationship with anybody, I mean, even Israel, there are delays and there are cost escalations. This is the nature of the beast, if you want, in the purchase of military equipment and military-related equipment. You should also recall that in 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian economy was totally devastated. I mean, in 1998, they declared a sovereign default. So they did have production problems. There's little doubt about that. They had production problems, and there were several times when they may not have delivered on the dot as promised per contract. But by and large, I would say that both sides have benefited from this relationship in the defense sector. Right? Russians, because they have been substantially able to keep their military industrial complex together through orders from countries like India and China, which are really large orders. China much less nowadays. And India, because some critical systems have been supplied to us, but now there has been a certain dilution of that. We find that China is also getting similar systems.
Yeah.
And in fact, this 400, the Chinese got before us, something that would not have happened in the past.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
But we have to ascribe that to something else. This is not because, Putin is this evil genius and he's got some plans to sort of cut out India or something. No.
Yeah.
The point is that in geopolitics is changing. There are several new powers that are emerging, and Russia is very keen on developing what we call a multipolar world.
Yeah.
And in a multipolar world, any great power would want to maintain relationships and engagement with all powers.
Yeah. And India also subscribes to the multipolar.
We also subscribe to that.
Yeah.
We subscribe. Exactly. So they have the same interest. So therefore, just as we improve our relationship with the United States, with Japan, Australia, and who have you, they are improving their relationships with China, Pakistan, and all. It just so happens that some of these are our adversaries, but we are also improving relations with their adversaries.
Exactly.
Today, for example, it would be difficult for anyone to argue that the United States is not a more important partner than Russia. But at the same time, it would be difficult for anyone to argue that Russia does not play a critical role in our overall international strategy. So, therefore, I would view this as India-Russia relationship have a place. India is invested in it because India gains a clear-cut benefit from it. And the relationship, as it were, of course, it is buffeted by what is happening around in the world, but there is enough ballast in the relationship for it to keep moving it for at least the next 10, 15 years.
One of the reasons why I say Russia has not been a great friend to India is because of its growing ties with the second elephant in the room, China. Now, China is second only to India when it comes to military imports from Russia, with total exports between 2016 and 2020 amounting to $5.1 billion. Trade between the two countries has also been going up from $50 billion in 2016 to $147 billion in 2020, making China Russia's largest trading partner. Now, relations between the two great powers started frosty, with most of them being in the Cold War decades. But it has vastly changed since the early 90s. And when Putin came to power, China was one of the first countries he turned to for expanding Russia's economic ties. Russia has also pertinently been calibrated in its response on some of China's key international issues like the South China Sea, the Hong Kong protests of 2019, and most recently, COVID-19. President Putin also recently visited China during the Beijing Olympics in February 2020, where Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping signed a pact called the International Relations Entering a New Era in the Global Sustainable Development, and stated that the friendship between the two countries had quote-unquote no limits and quote-unquote no forbidden areas of cooperation. Now, these statements of friendships are of course tricky for India, who considers China a strong adversary, especially since the incidents of June 2020. And after the searing sanctions which the West has placed on the Russian economy and the financial systems, Russia may grow increasingly dependent on China. Pertinently, China and Russia are also on the same page when it comes to core interest in the face of US unilateralism and share a strong friendship. So far on the Ukraine crisis, China, like India, has abstained from all the votes and has not condemned Russia. Historically, China also does not recognize the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But if it does change its stance on the issue in reflection of its deep friendship with Russia, would this be the trigger for India to join the US and its allies in condemning Russia? According to Mr. Unnikrishnan, as long as Russia does not deviate from its stance on the China-India conflict, which has been neutral so far, the growing ties between Russia and China should not be a huge concern for India.
No, you see, our relationship, I keep emphasizing that our relationship with Russia has an independent basis because we both mutually agree that there are some benefits which we both derive from it. Russia derives some and India derives. So essentially what we are saying is we need each other.
Yeah.
Of course, we are not the significant other in each relationship.
Yeah.
Right? That stage is over. We are not in that the heydays of the Indo-Soviet relationship. Right? Things have evolved and we've moved on, as it were. For us, of course, dealing with China's rise, aggressive rise, if I may say so, in Asia, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, is our primary concern. And in the Indo-Pacific region, USA is our primary partner in this. But on the continental shelf, particularly after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, US is, yes, of course, US is a global power, so it has a footprint, but it is not the most significant player. Russia's footprint in Eurasia, particularly Central Asia and all, is much, much more evident, let's say. And if India is interested, and so is Russia at this point, at least so far, interested in somehow managing China's rise and preventing the emergence of a hegemon in Asia, then of course India and Russia have to move together. That is one. Now the second part of it, so therefore, if China decides to support Russia, as long as Russia does not change its position vis-a-vis us, right? Which is that, for example, during the 2020 incident that took place April onwards, the Russians did not publicly say anything. They were sort of neutral, but they did not move against us either in any fashion, right? And on the contrary, they facilitated the first meeting between our ministers in Moscow on the sidelines, I think, of the SCO. And that is what led to the subsequent de-escalation talks. So, and they kept up the arms supplies, as I told you earlier. In fact, according to Rajnath Singh, our defense minister, they even expedited some deliveries as per our request. So, to that extent, I think I would say that China's changing its position is not necessarily going to affect us if it does not result in Russia tilting more towards China. If India feels that Russia is sort of becoming a junior partner to China, which I personally believe is still some way off. They may be aligned, but they are not in an alliance, not yet. But as I said, given the kind of unprecedented sanctions that the West has announced against Russia, if Russia finds itself in economic dire straits, it may have to turn towards China for help. And just as I said, United States doesn't do charity, neither does China. No great power does charity. So there is always a price to be extracted. And that is what we will be carefully observing in India. So China changing its position is par for the course. That depends on their reading of a particular situation at a particular point of time. Right? But we will read the situation depending on our interests. And if we feel that our interests are not impinged, I don't see any reason for us to want to change anything that we are doing.
Moving now to the third elephant in the room and the biggest one of all, the United States. The Indo-US ties have been growing strong for years. President Barack Obama once even described the ties as one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. Both sides have met frequently over the past few years, and President Joe Biden's recognition of Quad also signals how important a partner the US considers India to be. However, over the past year, the relation has been on choppy waters, and the not-so-subtle reminders that the US has provided India on its position in the Ukraine crisis has put the country in a bind. The first reminder came in the form of a tweet from Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, where he said that he spoke to External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and indicated the quote-unquote importance of a strong collective response to Russian aggression. The second reminder was from Joe Biden himself, who in a press conference said that the issue of being fully in sync with India on the crisis has not been resolved completely. And the third reminder came from the US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who, while introducing the UNGA resolution, said that, quote-unquote, vote yes if you believe in upholding the UN Charter, vote no or abstain if you do not uphold the Charter. And as we know, India abstained. Apart from these recent reminders, US and its lawmakers have also been very vocal about India upholding democratic values and human rights. And for the second time in a row, US-based human rights watchdog Freedom House has kept India's status as quote-unquote partly free in its annual report. When it comes to India-Russia relations, the US has been silent since it knows the history of the deep ties between the two countries. But the one sticking point where the US lawmakers have raised contention about again and again is the S-400 missile deal. The US Congress has been clear that India will face sanctions under CAATSA, and this looming threat of sanctions has remained unsolved since the S-400 deal was signed in 2018. So the big question here is, will India's current stance on Ukraine push the US to change its mind to impose the sanctions once and for all? Mr. Unikrishnan weighs in.
Well, I do not for a moment expect the United States to show charity to anybody. I think the United States has very clear-cut interests and understands its interests, and they calculate their interests very cold-bloodedly. And then they take measures and steps to try and achieve those protection of those interests or whatever aims and goals they have set for themselves. So to that extent, if the United States determines that India is violating or moving against its strategic interests, I have no hesitation in believing that they will come down on us like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
Right. However, if they feel that India is contributing to their overall strategic environment in a positive manner, then they are going to close their eyes to what they perceive to be some infringements of their law. Yeah. The problem with CAATSA is that it is a law in the United States. So, whatever we do, we are violating that law.
Yeah.
So their legal system is slightly more complex than ours. It's not just simply that the president gives a waiver and it works like that. There will be discussion, there will be debate. Washington, D.C. is very polarized at this point of time. So, it could cause some issues. However, India is also proceeding with this purchase, not because it is worried about sanctions or not. Let's be very clear. We are buying this because we feel it will enhance our national security. And this is irrespective of whether somebody sanctions us or not.
Yeah.
We have made a determination that this is the best in class system available.
Yeah.
And we've decided we'll bite the bullet and buy it because it is not cheap. It's some $5 billion or something, right? Yeah. But we've decided it serves our purpose. It meets whatever requirements we have, and therefore we should get it. The first, as you noted, the first delivery of the first unit, I think, has taken place in December. There are 3 or 4 more units to come. They will keep coming. I mean, that I'm not worried about. I don't think the Russians, now that the payments have been made to them, that they are likely to renege on this. Because after all, let's not forget that at the height of our little tension on the border with China, they kept up the military supplies. Despite Chinese requests or whatever, they did not stop supplying arms to us. So I really don't see any reason why they should suspend deliveries of the S-400. What we are also banking on vis-a-vis the United States is that the US sees us as a partner in its policy of promoting a transparent, open Indo-Pacific region, right? And the United States only benefits if India grows stronger, including militarily. So if you notice, even the Quad has a very minuscule, but still has a security element in it, right? And what we are buying from the Russians, I think even the Americans recognize, is only going to strengthen India. And it is going to, after all, we physically have a conflict, and we can see out of the experience with Ukraine that US soldiers are not going to be fighting with us in the Himalayas. So we better protect ourselves,
Yeah.
And the Americans are aware of that. So I personally feel that there will probably be an exemption granted by the United States on the purchase of the S-400s. But as I said, the situation, what is developed in Ukraine and the way it is going, nothing is predictable.
Yeah.
India has so far managed to evacuate the majority of its citizens out of Ukraine, even the stranded students in Sumy. However, the answer to the big question still remains. For how long can India look back on old friendships to make foreign policy decisions in the present and the future? If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.